We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It is Monday, January 1st, 2024, as you're listening to this. But I want you to understand something. You know, I normally record this in the early morning hours of whatever day this podcast is released. Now, this is kind of interesting because this will be the first time the podcast, one single episode, is recorded in 2 different years, because I'm starting out about 11:30 on December 31st, 2023. And by the time I'm done, it will be well into 2024. Not that that means anything, but just to give you some perspective as to what's going on here. So as you're listening to me right now, I'm not in 2024, even though you are. Weird, huh? Anyway, we're moving into 2024. And I tell people regarding 2023 or any times in your life that might have been rough, just leave that shit behind. There's no reason for you to agonize over what happened in the past. Only look to the future. The future is where the hope is. The past, you can't relive it. You can't fix things that have already gone past you. So just focus on the future. People agonized a lot about 2023. Oh my, what's going to happen? We'll never survive. This is horrible. The sun's going to fall in on us. You got all the people predicting all these calamities that are going to happen. But guess what? It's now 2024 and we're still here. We're still here. That's the one thing that always keeps me going. 63 years old, I look back on my life and I realize that I've gone through my share of shit, something similar to what everybody goes through: trauma, trials, tribulations, disasters, losses of friends and family. All these things seem insurmountable, that you can't handle them or it will change everything forever. But the thing that brings me back to being grounded is that I look at myself now and I say, hey, I'm 63 years old. I went through all that stuff. All of it seemed horrible, but here I sit. And not only do here I sit, but I sit in a comfortable spot. I feel good about where I am today. So I don't worry about the past. You shouldn't worry about the past. We should look to the future. And frankly, in 2024, the future looks bright. We've talked about the legal system and how slow it works. Well, we spent all of 2023 and some of 2022 getting things in order, getting indictments, setting up trials, watching Donald Trump try to delay things. But we're past all that now. 2024 promises to be fast and furious and more accountability. Finally, after all the work that's been put in, the time we've waited, the patience we've exerted, that we're going to get some payoff from this. And I firmly believe that. 2024, we will see some action and we will see the dismantling of Donald Trump and the whole MAGA community. They're not going to make it through 2024. Promise you that. There's all too many things that are hanging over their head, and none of them are good. Their prospects for 2024 are bleak, and they need to understand that. So we're going to push forward. Around this time of year, people make resolutions, proclamations, or promises that things will be better this next year. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to make more money. I'm going to make 2 resolutions. And those resolutions are this. First of all, I promise that I'm going to be just as loud, obnoxious, and tenacious when it comes to Trump-a-fucks and Donald Trump himself. Whatever you heard in 2023, it's probably going to be ramped up as we head toward the election. There's no reason to let up now. This is not the time to slow down or give up. We've got to pour on the steam and go after these motherfuckers until they're eradicated from the equation. The other resolution I have is that I'm going to be the coolest and the most badass grandpa ever. And you notice when I pick out these resolutions, I pick out easy ones that I know that I can complete. I'm not going to tell you I'm going to be a multi-millionaire by the end of 2024, because that's not going to happen, but that doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm fine where I'm at. Or that I'm going to lose a ton of weight. I might do that because it's a healthy thing to do. But the fact of the matter is we've got some work to do for 2024. And this end of 2023 should just be inspiration for us to pour on the steam going into 2024. I don't know why I've got runny eyes and a runny nose. I don't know what it is, but so you'll bear with me here, I'm sure. I mean, it's fucking New Year's Day. Who does a podcast on New Year's Day? And again, the other question is who listens to a podcast on New Year's Day? What I like about this day is, though, it's kind of an easy day. And starting tomorrow, we get back on the news track. Things are going to start happening again, and we can talk about all the happenings in the country and in throughout the world. As I say, I see 2024 as a bright spot in the future, and I'm looking forward to getting into it and getting through it. Other thing I want to tell you, tomorrow morning, my wife and I and my youngest son are flying to Georgia. Now, because my wife's airline doesn't fly directly to Savannah this time of year, we're going to have to fly to Orlando, Florida, and then drive up to Savannah. I hate the concept of going to Florida, but I can assure you this, once we get off the plane, we go to the car and we get the fuck out of Dodge. I don't know much about Orlando, but if I was going to go to Florida to enjoy myself, last fucking place I'd go. Not that Orlando's a bad spot, but if you're in Florida, you might as well be on the fucking beach. But with Ron DeSantis as the current governor, I don't know what the safety factors are in Florida at this point. Every motherfucker's got a gun. So we'll get into Georgia and fairly quickly and headed on to Savannah. But I will be doing the podcast from Savannah. So, you know, it might look a little different. The camera's not quite as good, you know, all that shit. But we'll get it done. We will get it done. I have a new setup, so it's a little better than it was, but still not quite like what we have here. All right. We have some emails to get to. So let's do that. First one comes from Nancy. She says, "Hi, Mike. I was listening to your Saturday podcast about Trump's land deals. In 2016, I visited the Trump winery with a few girlfriends. We visited many wonderful wineries that day and only went because it was on the way to a planned stop. Our sample was good, and even then, I didn't like the guy. I was struck by an article from the local paper that was displayed on the wall in the tasting room. It described how the Trump company got the property. They are proud of how they got the property." Nancy. Now, Nancy doesn't describe how they got the property, but I wouldn't be surprised if it were some scurrilous ventures by Donald Trump. The fact of the matter is this is what he does. You know, he plays games, he cheats people. I'd be curious, Nancy, to know what that is. Maybe I missed something in the email, but tell me what it said, and I won't be surprised because Donald Trump is known for being a little shady. And I think that's one of the things that's going to work against him in this lawsuit. We're getting that much closer to Judge Engoron in New York coming up with an amount that Donald Trump will be fined and what will happen with his businesses. Now, the thing is, it's going to be so much money that he can't just go into his piggy bank and pull it out. So it's going to involve liquidating some properties. Now, the other thing about him liquidating properties, that doesn't mean they're all owned free and clear by him. They're not really owned by him. They're owned by various companies. And I can almost guarantee you that most of these are leveraged and borrowed on to the hilt, which would mean that they don't have much in equity. So you might have a $50 million building, but if you only got $5 million in equity, you got to sell a lot of buildings to make back whatever money that he's going to be fined. So this is going to be interesting. But the other aspect of this is something Nancy's suggesting. If any of these properties were gained by unscrupulous manners, the court could just fucking take him. He gets no equity and it doesn't go toward the amount of money he owes. So I'm willing to bet there's a number of unscrupulous deals that he's been involved in. And if those properties can be tied to such a activity, you may not get anything out of this shit, which would be cool. We want to bury Donald Trump. We want to break him financially because that is the one thing that he identifies with. If he doesn't have money and power, he's nothing but a shell who will be kicked around from court to court, losing at every turn. All right, the next one is from Patty. She said earlier, apparently in Colorado, you don't have to live in the district you run in, Grandma. P.S. If you don't want to call me Grandma, try Patty. That's what most people call me, although I prefer Grandma to all the nicknames I've had over the years because, as you know, granddaughters rock, Patty. Yes, granddaughters do rock. I'm having a little trouble calling you Grandma because I sleep with Grandma. You understand what I'm saying? Now, I've had grandmas when I was younger, but they're long gone. But Grandma's in the bedroom right now for me. I'll call you Patty because you're not my grandma, but I appreciate the fact that you want to, uh, you like the name Grandma because I do like the name Grandpa. When I hear her call me out, that is awesome. I don't usually like nicknames. I've had some in the past, never liked them. Do like that one. I appreciate your love for that nom de plume. And as far as apparently in Colorado, you don't have to live in the district you run in. You do technically and legally. You have to live in the community that you're running in. And what you're talking about, Lauren Boebert moving from one district to another district, what she has to do is physically move to that district or at least have some kind of property where she claims she lives. We know the Republicans have had occasion to run in a certain district because it was preferable to them or easier for them and just buy an apartment and say they live there and not live there. If I was Lauren Boebert, I probably wouldn't do that. She's kind of under the microscope now, and she would probably be found out pretty quickly. But I presume if she's going to run in this other district at some point between now and the election, she's got to move from where she is to that district. We'll see what happens. She's getting a lot of heat about this move. I think she thought this was going to be more preferential to her because it was more of a Republican stronghold. Now, keep in mind the place she was in, the district, was very Republican too. This one just happens to be more Republican. And frankly, she needs all the help she can get. But all the bad press she's getting right now from this move, I don't think it's going to help her. I don't think it's going to help her at all. And I think she's fucked. And I don't think she'll get reelected. All right. Next one says, Happy New Year again, Mike. Wanted to reach out again because I heard some very encouraging news on MSNBC today. Simon Rosenberg is a Democratic strategist who was on MSNBC this morning saying that Joe Biden's chances of winning the election are much better than people realize. That's what I've been saying. First time that I've heard someone say something that strong on the news. Was very pleased to hear what he had to say, and then the anchor went to a guest on the show who agreed completely. It's the most positive sounding report I've heard in a long time, instead of all the hair on fire about DJT and what we're going to do if he wins. I do think that Joe Biden needs to get much louder about all his accomplishments so far because that is really more important than any of the other minutiae. His impact on gas prices, inflation, and the economy speak louder than anything, hoping that this is the beginning of the media saying more positive things about President Biden and the accomplishments that have been made. It's probably going to be a very bumpy ride in the beginning, but I think that we're on our way to better times. Looking forward to hearing more positive predictions about 2024 election. Best always, Judy, crazy cat mom in Portland. Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. We've heard all this dread and dire and disaster ahead from the media. At some point, they're going to have to make the transition. It'll be apparent that Joe Biden is well ahead in the upcoming election. And they have to be careful because they're going to get called out for this when they're exposed for being wrong. So I think you will see more people siding with Joe Biden. And frankly, common sense tells you that. We've talked about this 100 times on the podcast, why I believe Joe Biden is going to win. I had somebody come to my comments saying, yeah, you're the only one I've ever heard that believes Joe Biden is going to win. Bullshit. That's bullshit. If I'm the only one, then I must be a fucking genius because I know Joe Biden will get reelected, assuming he's the nominee. I also know for a fact that Donald Trump will not be elected president. He may not even be the nominee. You know, it's funny. I think I talked about this yesterday. Why the Republicans are holding on so tightly to a loser like Donald Trump, why they need him to be the nominee. And I've heard some people talk about this, and I think I understand now. They don't think Donald Trump is going to win. They're not stupid enough to think that he has a prayer. But the problem is that anybody that votes for Donald Trump will not show up if he's not the nominee. They just won't vote. I mean, these are fucking cult members. So why would they show up? Nobody's going to compete with Donald Trump with the Trump-a-fox. Now, the problem is either way, Donald Trump doesn't win, whether they show up and he's the nominee or he's not the nominee and they don't show up. The real problem lies in the down ballot. If 30% of the Republicans don't show up, Donald Trump, of course, won't be a factor, but this will impact all the state or the representatives, the senators, the state legislators, the governors, all those people that don't show up because Donald Trump's not in it will not show up for all those people too. And it'll make it that much harder for them to win the House and the Senate. They're not going to. But if they think they have any chance at all, they need as many votes as they can get. And if Donald Trump is out and everybody stays home that's in the Donald Trump cult, they're fucked. So this is why they're holding on to Donald Trump so tightly. You know, it's funny. A lot of people out here worry about Joe Biden. He's going to be 82. What happens if he kicks off between now and 2024? Granted, Joe Biden is old and anything is possible. But if I was worried about somebody taking a dirt nap between now and 2024, it would be Donald Trump. Donald Trump is 3 or 4 years younger than Joe Biden, but he's in a world of difference when it comes to physical shape. And then you throw into the mix all this stress and strain on top of him, the thought that he might go to jail. That's a lot to put on somebody, an elderly person like Donald Trump, who's not in the best shape. I think if you were looking to have somebody keel over before the election, it's more than likely going to be Donald Trump and not Joe Biden. All right, the last email. Hey, Mike, your buddy from Texas, Jace, wanted to take a moment to wish you and your family a happy new year. I do appreciate the daily show and info as well as your stories. I woke up early to drop my mom at the airport Sunday, and I was listening to your show and your story about your granddaughter cussing out the iPad. I literally had to pull over the car so I could laugh. God damn, I laughed so hard it hurt. That is one of the great things about being a kid. They are honest and expressive. Made my day. Thanks for the laugh and the words of encouragement you always bring. 2024 will be a great year for the Democrats and democracy, but I feel you're right. The Trump train is about to make its last stop. Take care, my friend, and can't wait for more Rational Boomer in 2024. Jace from Texas. He was on the show recently, and it's always a pleasure to have Jace on the show. It's interesting to have somebody from Texas give us some insight about what's going on in that crazy motherfucking state. You know, when I talk about Florida or Texas and my disdain for those states, I want people to understand I'm sure I have listeners from those states. I don't hate everybody in the state. I don't even hate the state. I hate the people in control of the state and how they're running it. And if you're of a like mind, you probably have the same feeling. Unfortunately, you're living in that state. I'm looking forward to the time when we get some decent leadership in those states, shore up all the problems in those states, because I love going to Florida. One place I've never been before is the Keys, and I really want to go to the Keys. But I like to go to Miami. I like going to Fort Myers and all that sort of thing. My wife will go down there from time to time with her friends, and Texas too. Now, my wife loves Corpus Christi. I've never been there. She went there before we were married when she was in high school or college or whatever. I'd like to see Corpus Christi. I love San Antonio. I love Dallas. But you guys got to shore this shit up. I just don't feel safe there. I mean, for Christ's sake, we got a lot of Trumplefucks running around there. And on a rare occasion, I do get recognized. I'm kind of loud. And if you're on TikTok or listening to the podcast or Instagram or Facebook, you might know who I am. Now, if you're a friend, I'm cool with that. It's a great honor. It's flattering for somebody to recognize me. But if a dumbass Trumplefuck with a bad attitude recognizes me, well, that's going to be a bad day for everybody. And I just soon avoid that shit. Anyway, thanks, Jace. We'll no doubt talk to you in the near future, and we'll see more emails from him and all the rest. And again, I encourage you to send the emails. Emails are very valuable to me because there are days like today when there's not as much going on. It's a holiday, so the news is pretty much shut down, government is shut down. And so what do you talk about? Well, there's always some things, but I'm trying to fill up an hour here. So it's important that I get these emails. I love the insights. I love the questions. I love the fact that you're interacting on the show because I think that's very important. I don't know if you can hear it in the background. There's some fireworks going on outside the building, quite a ways away, I think, because they're kind of distant. But as I said, I started this show at about 11:39, 2023. It is now midnight in Minnesota at the time I'm recording this. So now I'm in 2024. Started out in 2023. Now I'm in 2024. So to all of you, Happy New Year. And get ready. The shit's about to fly. All right. We were talking about Florida. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is now promising, get this, promising that if he's elected president in 2024, he'll pardon Donald Trump if the former president, who's facing 91 felony charges and 4 indictments, has been convicted. Ronnie, you're fucking desperate. I mean, first of all, you're never going to be president. You're certainly not going to be the nominee. But giving this comment is not going to help you much. It may ingratiate you to Donald Trump and to the Trumplefox, but there's not enough of them to make a difference. There's other people that will pass you by because people aren't as weird and awkward as you are. So I don't even know why you do this. This pretty much finishes your campaign. You're done. You're going to pardon Donald Trump. Well, that's well and good, Ronnie, but try pardoning him from Georgia or New York. You're not going to be able to do it. You may get him off a federal case if you became president, which isn't going to happen, but you're not getting him off the state cases. So fuck yourself. The Republican presidential candidate during a stop Friday in Iowa declared that he already said that long ago when questioned about whether he'd pardon the Republican nomination's frontrunner. I think we've got to move on as a country. And, like Ford did to Nixon, because the divisions are not in the country's interests, said DeSantis, adding that he said that months ago when asked about pardoning the former president, a DeSantis campaign spokesperson responded simply correct when asked by NBC on Saturday to clarify if the Florida governor was committed to pardon granting Trump, giving him a presidential pardon. So they agreed. That's the plan for Ronnie DeSantis. Like I say, even if some miracle happened and he was president, try pardoning him from Georgia and New York. Won't happen. You aren't going to do much good. And you know that. The only reason you're saying that is if Donald Trump drops off of the nomination out of the primaries, you want those Trumplafucks to back you up because you're such a good guy that you are going to pardon Donald Trump. They better vote for you so Donald Trump can be saved. It's a big game. It has nothing to do with law or truth. It has everything to do with you trying to garner some help from the Trumplafucks. Well, good luck with that. You're not going to get it. You're too fucking weird. Now, DeSantis' recent remarks about the former president arrived months after he was asked whether he'd look at potentially pardoning Trump supporters convicted in the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol, and Trump himself, whose charges include attempting to overturn the 2020 election and mishandling classified documents taken from the White House when he left office. This is what Ron said. On day one, I will have folks that will get together and look at all these cases who are people who are victims of weaponization or political targeting. And we will be aggressive at issuing pardons, he said in May on the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show, a right-wing radio program. Yeah, that sounds like a big show. I would say any example of disfavored treatment based on politics or weaponization would be included in that review, no matter how small or how big, he said on the radio show. Well, that's nice, Rob or Roddy, but you're not going to be president, so it's all just jibber jabber. In July, he said on Megyn Kelly's show that he's going to do what's right for the country. Oh, really? You're going to take a totally different tact with the country than you have with Florida, adding that he didn't think it'd be a good for the country to have an almost 80-year-old former president go to prison. It doesn't seem like it would be a good thing, he continued, citing a pardon decision he deemed a historic mistake. And I look at, like, Ford pardoned Nixon, took some heat for it, but at the end of the day, it's like, do we want to move forward as a country? Now, Gerald Ford, who had been Nixon's vice president, pardoned him after Nixon resigned in 74 amid the Watergate investigation of elevating Ford to the presidency. However, if you remember, Ford was not reelected. He was a one-term president. Did you think about that, Ronnie? Did you think about that? Ronnie's lying. He's not going to pardon Donald Trump if he's president, and he's being foolish if he thinks he's ever going to be president. Now, other 2024 Republican candidates have also weighed in on the pardon question, including former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who sided with doing what's in the best interest of the country, and Ohio biotech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, who vowed he would pardon Trump as his first act as president. Again, Vivek, what are you going to do about Georgia and New York? You can't pardon people from state crimes. So this is what I love about the Republicans. And this is something I remember somebody taught me one time in a sales job. And it doesn't work, and I never used it, but it's what they're doing. And it's called assuming the sale. So if I'm trying to sell somebody something, act as if he already bought it. Now, that pisses most people off that have half a brain. I've had people do it to me, and I put them in their place. But this is what they're doing. They're acting like they're confident. They're acting like they know what's going to happen, and they act like it's a foregone conclusion. Well, I'm sorry, Vivek. You're going to be nowhere near the fucking presidency. I know you're hoping against hope that maybe you'll be Trump's vice president, but Donald Trump will not win the presidency. So you're fighting a fight that you can't win. Ron DeSantis, he's going to be nowhere nearby either. He's fucked already. Everything he's done, he screwed himself in the campaign. He's done. Nikki Haley, I still can't believe Nikki Haley would be the Republican nominee. She's a woman and she's from East Indian heritage. Her parents are immigrants. Does that sound like a good candidate for a white supremacist party like the Republicans? I don't think so. Who are they going to get? And then, this is why I've said before, I hope Donald Trump continues to be the nominee as long as he possibly can. First of all, if he makes it to the election, he's going to get his ass kicked. But if he doesn't make it to the election, the longer he goes, the less time they have to figure out the option B. And it's been said that they don't have an option B. So this is going to put them in a bad situation. And nothing I'd like more than seeing the Republicans in a bad situation. All right, we are going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. While you're listening to this podcast, it's well into January 1st, 2024. At this recording, though, I'm looking at 12/11, January 1st, 2024. It's a new year, bitches, and things are looking good. I saw a meme yesterday that was kind of interesting, funny. And you have to be a boomer or at least a Gen Xer to know what I'm talking about, understand the reference. But it had a picture of Jan Brady from the Brady Bunch. If you don't know who that is, you're not going to think this is funny. So just Google that shit or whatever you want to do, or just hold on for a minute. I'll get by it quickly. But in this meme, it had a picture of Jan Brady. And it says, all year it's Marsha, Marsha, Marsha. But today it's Jan 1st. I liked it. It's cute. It's not dirty, but it's cute. Anyway, in 2023, the Supreme Court lost a lot of ground, a lot of credibility. They don't show any integrity. And they were pressured and they came up with some bullshit code of ethics that really didn't fool anybody. And now, as we're going out at the end of the year, Chief Justice John Roberts didn't make it any better. So the reputation of the Supreme Court flowed quickly down the drain all of 2023 as there were more reports detailing the scandalous breach of ethics unfolding in the Supreme Court. The final report of the year from Chief Justice John Roberts left out mounting questions for the top judiciary and problems about whether the body is too far gone to repair its image. So what John Roberts did basically is what Donald Trump did with COVID. Let's just not talk about it. It'll go away. Got news for you, John. Your criminality, your corruption in your court, not going away. It's going to get worse for you in 2024. When we hit that election, if the Democrats take the House and the Senate, you may want to watch your back because there's a Supreme Court stacking headed your way. Washington Post columnist Ann E. Marimo wrote Sunday that the yearly report from Roberts left out a lot, and it's not going to help as the court enters 2024. Instead, he looked back on technological advancement in the nation's court system, detailing the developments from the quill pens used by justices in the 19th century to electronic databases of the 1980s to online trial proceedings prompted by the coronavirus pandemic. Now, while Roberts rambled on about artificial intelligence, he refused to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Public approval of the Supreme Court remains at historically low levels, reflecting a dip that followed its 2022 decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. That was the turning point for the Supreme Court. They got a lot of heat for that. They're going to continue to get a lot of heat for that. And ultimately, the Democrats will have power. They'll codify it and then fuck the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, Justice Clarence Thomas has been destroyed publicly after it was exposed for accepting benefits for his mother, his adopted nephew, his wife, luxury travel, all from a single super wealthy Republican donor with at least one case before him. What Roberts did do in 2023 was craft a formal code of conduct, though it does little to address the issues at hand and protect the integrity of the impartiality of the court. Now, the policy was praised by some as a positive initial step, but criticized by legal ethics experts or giving the justices too much discretion over recusal decisions, and for not including a process for holding the justices accountable if they violate their own rules. We've got rules, but if you break the rules, we're not going to do anything about it. Yeah, that does a lot for credibility. Now, in 2024, the court will be forced to decide on so-called absolute immunity for the president and whether the ruling of the Colorado Supreme Court should be upheld for kicking Donald Trump off the ballot. It happens at a time when there are calls for Justice Thomas to recuse himself after his wife participated in efforts to overthrow the 2020 election and encourage state lawmakers to invalidate the account. Roberts did not mention that this time last year, the court was finishing its investigation into the shocking leak of Justice Samuel Alito Jr.'s draft opinion that eventually overturned a half century of abortion rights. The court's investigative report released last January did not determine the identity of the leaker. You mean to tell me the Supreme Court has a leak, something that almost never happens, and you can't find the leaker? I dare say you know exactly who the leaker is. You just don't want to expose them, because the obvious leaker of that Roe v. Wade decision is Samuel Alito himself. Tell me I'm wrong. Excuse me. It also ignored the fact that Alito himself was never investigated. He should have been the prime suspect, and he wasn't even investigated. So how are we to trust the Supreme Court when this kind of ridiculousness is going on? Now, while the court's IT expert did not rule out a hack, the report said there was no evidence to suggest improper access to the court's IT networks. So there was no hack. They couldn't find the leaker, and they didn't investigate Alito. A lot of circumstantial evidence. I would say check Alito. If you couldn't find them amongst all the staff in the Supreme Court, why not check the Supreme Court justices? I mean, it's got to be one of them if it's not everybody else. See, that's the problem with the Supreme Court. They can't be trusted. And if you have a Supreme Court that you can't count on, that you can't trust, it's hard to maintain a democracy. All right, Sarah Matthews, a former Trump deputy press secretary, explained that former officials in the Trump administration don't speak out about January 6th because they fear death. Now, it was interesting. Jonathan Karl on ABC sat down with former Trump officials Alyssa Farah Griffin, Cassidy Hutchinson, and Sarah Matthews to ask about their cooperation with the January 6th committee. Matthews explained why some Republicans still have not come forward. She said, I think it's really easy to paint all of these Republicans with a broad brush and say that they're doing it for, their own personal ambitions, which I think is a large majority of them. But I think another thing that we have to consider as a factor is that a lot of these people won't come forward, even if privately they'll acknowledge that Trump is unfit or will privately acknowledge the 2020 election wasn't stolen. It's because they know they will face death threats, that their family will face death threats. I knew that coming forward and speaking out against Donald Trump, I could potentially face security threats or death threats, online harassment. But Matthews said coming forward ultimately is the right thing to do. And Alyssa Farah Griffin agreed. Yeah, I think that's a big reason why we don't see Republicans come forward against Donald Trump. They're fearful for their lives. Now think about that. You have a former president who broke a lot of rules, committed a lot of crimes, and people are under the understanding that if you go against Donald Trump, if you're just honest and tell the truth, that Donald Trump will sick his dumb Trump-la-fucks on you, and it may be risking your life. We've seen it before. We'll see it in the future. That in itself should be troubling to everyone, not just Democrats, but Republicans as well. You have somebody that has a stranglehold on you because you're afraid. Do you really trust this person? Do you really want to stand by him? I'm going to tell you this. If Cassidy Hutchinson, um, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and Miss Matthews have the courage, these young women have the courage to stand up against Donald Trump, some of you old fuck congressmen should have the courage. These women have more balls than any of you, and they're speaking out, and they're getting the heat that Donald Trump will rot. But somebody's got to do it for the betterment of this country. But apparently, you don't care about the country. What you care about is your own ass. Well, there's going to be a time when you're going to have to step away from Donald Trump and you're going to have to own up to the things you know. But by the time you do that, it will be too late, and whatever you do will have no value. Right now, you hold some value because Donald Trump has yet to be convicted. Once he's convicted and you finally feel safe, it's going to be too late because there's going to be no value in what you have to say. What's been done has been done. Donald Trump is paying the price for the crimes. And you were too afraid to step up and say a fucking thing, even though you know better. That's the one thing about the Republicans. They are some cowardice motherfuckers. There's no question about it. Representative Jamie Raskin, the House Oversight Committee's ranking Democrat, said on Sunday that he believes Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas should recuse himself if the High Court decides to hear cases regarding decisions in some states on whether to remove Donald Trump from the primary ballots in 2024. That's a big ask. The Maryland Democrats' remarks came after officials in Colorado and Maine recently decided that the former president and current frontrunner of the 2024 Republican nomination is not eligible to appear on the ballots because of insurrection. It was actually two very conservative legal scholars who wrote the best, most authoritative law review article on the whole thing, saying that Donald Trump is clearly disqualified from being on the ballot because he participated in insurrection. So this becomes a test for the originalists and the textualists on the Supreme Court. And I think all of the justices from the left to the right call themselves textualists and originalists. The language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is very clear. He said the Civil War era clause. It says if you have sworn an oath to support the Constitution and violated that oath by engaging in insurrection or rebellion, you can never hold public office again. And the original purpose of it are equally clear because actually when the language was first authored by the radical Republicans in Congress, it was very broad. Now, Raskin, you have to remember, is a former constitutional law professor, so he knows his shit. He also served on the House Select Committee that investigated the January 6th, 21 riot at the Capitol. The bipartisan panel concluded that Trump and his allies carried out a plan to keep him in power, including inciting the insurrection at the Capitol as Congress met to certify the presidential vote. Trump currently faces charges in multiple cases related to the attempts to overturn the 2020 election. It's also important to remember that the Colorado Supreme Court, first and foremost, found that Donald Trump was involved in insurrection. And then after that, they took him off the ballot. So that's something the Supreme Court has to deal with when they get it handed up to them. They have to consider that a Supreme Court of a state has found him guilty of insurrection. Now, of course, this Colorado Supreme Court came up with this decision earlier in December, but the decision was stayed until the U.S. Supreme Court decides whether the former president violated the insurrection clause. The state's Republican Party appealed the decision, and Raskin has previously said that the High Court should take on the case. Now, last week in Maine, Secretary of State Shenna Bellows took Trump from the state's presidential primary ballot for the same reason. After Trump's campaign announced plans to appeal that decision, Bellows suspended her ruling until Maine state courts have ruled on the case. I think that the urgency is for the Supreme Court to act, Raskin said. But I think it's going to be tough for some of them if they want to keep Trump on the ballot, if they're falling for the argument that this is undemocratic. Though the Supreme Court recently developed what it calls an ethics code, the lawmakers stress that it is non binding, so they're deciding for themselves again whether they're in violation of the code of ethics or not. Given that the High Court has a conservative majority, including 3 justices who were nominated by Trump, Raskin stressed the importance of some members recusing themselves if they come across cases related to the former president's name being removed from the ballot. And that makes some sense. If he nominated you and if you've been nothing but a supporter of Donald Trump, which you shouldn't be as a Supreme Court justice, you should recuse yourself. Problem is there's nothing forcing them to recuse themselves. They've been relatively untouched at this point. That's why when the Democrats finally get some power in Congress, they have to address the Supreme Court right away. The first thing they have to do is codify Roe v. Wade, take that decision away from the Supreme Court, and then address the Supreme Court. And if we have to stack the Supreme Court, then so be it. Because if we don't have a Supreme Court that we can trust, that has credibility, it's hard to have a democracy. And we know this election is all about saving democracy. We started out by kicking Donald Trump out of the race and beating his ass, getting some of the MAGA fucks out of Congress. But if we want to save democracy, we've got to save the Supreme Court. Now, the Democrat, Raskin, cited Thomas in particular. The conservative justice has been mired in controversy for multiple reasons, but related to this case is the activism of his wife, Ginny Thomas, who elevated Trump's election fraud lies and was part of the crowd at Trump's Stop the Steal rally on January 6, 2021, in which the then president extolled the supporters to fight like hell and march on the Capitol. He incited an insurrection. An insurrection happened. There's no two ways to look at it. And if the Supreme Court comes out finding against the Colorado Supreme Court, they're going to be in a world of fucking hurt. People don't like those motherfuckers already. They don't trust them. And that is a big problem for the Supreme Court. Now, during an appearance on MSNBC on Sunday morning, former prosecutor Glenn Kirshner made a point of making Justice Neil Gorsuch the center of a discussion on whether the Supreme Court will rule that Donald Trump is eligible on the ballot in 2024 based upon the 14th Amendment. Now, he was speaking with the host, Michael Steele. Kirshner read from a previous ruling that Gorsuch authored before he joined the nation's highest court. This is what he said. I think the Supreme Court, probably recognize that time is of the essence, he told the host. This is something that has to be decided urgently as we move toward the primary elections in various states. I agree with Barbara McQuaid that the Supreme Court will inevitably take this up for review. Here's something fun to keep an eye out for, Michael. He added, I think what we need to keep an eye out for is whether Justice Neil Gorsuch agrees with Judge Neil Gorsuch with respect to how to resolve this issue. Frankly, my favorite part of the Supreme Court ruling in Colorado was when they quoted Judge Neil Gorsuch. About 10 years ago, he had to resolve this precise issue, whether states can keep would-be candidates off the primary ballots because the candidate was disqualified under some provision of the Constitution. He goes on to say, here's what Judge Neil Gorsuch wrote. A state's legitimate interest in protecting the integrity and practical functioning of the political process permits the state to exclude from the ballot candidates who are constitutionally prohibited from assuming office. Kirshner read before adding, so Judge Gorsuch is sort of 90% on the way there already, ruling that states have that authority. Let's see if Justice Gorsuch agrees with himself from 10 years earlier. Yeah, that was a brilliant thing for the Colorado Supreme Court to do, to quote Justice Gorsuch in their taking Donald Trump off the ballot. It's going to make it tough for Gorsuch. I'm not going to say that the Supreme Court will side with the Colorado Supreme Court. They should. By law, they should. If they're honest and decent, they should. But are we sure they're honest and decent? No, we're not. We don't trust the motherfuckers. So we just have to wait and see. So I've said before, I'm not as worried about the 14th Amendment issue. I don't think that's the way that Donald Trump is going to get taken down. I think it's going to be by the legal system, by his health, by the Republican Party. I don't think the 14th Amendment is absolutely necessary. But at this point, whatever it takes to take him down, we need to get him out of the equation as soon as possible. Now, here's something interesting. We know the Wall Street Journal is known for its far-right leanings. They're owned by Rupert Murdoch, for God's sake. But on New Year's Eve, associate editor John Bussey revealed to Fox viewers that the top issue in 2024 will likely be the economy, and Joe Biden is winning. It's about time somebody fucking said that. They keep ranting about the economy and how bad it is, but it's not. There is some issues with prices for groceries and that sort of thing, but that isn't a Joe Biden problem. I mean, it's his problem, but it's not something he can really control. This is about greed. People found that they could pump up the prices of products during the COVID pandemic. They pumped them up, and then when the pandemic was over, they said, this is pretty good. Let's just stick with it. And that's what they've done. They've tried to get away with it as long as they possibly can. And so the government has to go to them and say, fuck, you got to stop doing this. But they don't really have the control to do it. If we have high grocery prices, you can bet that it has to do more with greed than anything else. Now, he began citing former President Donald Trump's criminal prosecutions he'll be facing in 2024 after already being found to have sexually abused E. Jean Carroll in a civil court. And he's got another case coming up with E. Jean Carroll this month, a second one. How do you think he's going to do on that one? I got a suspicion that he's going to lose that one too. He's certainly trying to delay it, but it's not working. Bussey said this may also weigh on the undecided voters, but primary first and foremost issues for voters is going to be the economy. It always is pocketbook issues. And in that regard, President Biden is going to have a better and better story to tell as the year unfolds. It's a strong economy now. Inflation is coming down. Interest rates are coming down. The job market is strong. They're going to be pounding that over the next 10 months. And they should. And let's hope the Democrats are smart enough to do that. Now, the host tried to cut him off, asking if the numbers would be better fast enough for everyday Americans to feel them, implying that most families don't detect the positive turn on the economy. Bussey went on to say, yeah, that's the critical question, isn't it? I mean, the presumption is that 6 months before an election, the voter has kind of made up their mind. While we're not quite there at 6 months, and inflation caused by the pandemic, not by Trump administration or the Biden administration, but by the supply chain shortages from the pandemic, that inflation is still with us. Now, I'd like to beg to argue with this Bussey that the inflation was not caused by Donald Trump. I've always said that any economic disaster we had because of the pandemic, it hangs solidly on Donald Trump's back, because Donald Trump is the one that saw the pandemic and was negligent. He did nothing about it. And this is what made the pandemic worse. This is what caused shutdowns, schools and businesses. This is what caused the supply chain problem. Had Donald Trump done anything like any normal president would have done, it wouldn't have been nearly as bad. We wouldn't have gone through as many things as we did. So if you want to complain about the economy because of the pandemic, you got to hang it on Donald Trump. You just have to. He goes on to say prices are 19% higher than they were before the pandemic hit, caused by those pandemic-related supply chain problems. So that's going to weigh on the voters' minds, but they're also going to see more discounts in stores. Gas prices are way down. Inflation is 1/3 of what it was at its peak. Interest rates dropping, mortgage rates dropping. We'll see it. 4 months is going to be fast enough. And I think it will. I think it's in the tea leaves, if you were. I think we're on a track of destiny that Joe Biden will be the president. Donald Trump will be taken out. The MAGA party will flee, and the Republican Party will be standing there with their least impressive appendage in their hand, with their mouth agape, trying to figure out what to do now. I believe that's what's going to happen. All right. We're getting toward the end. We're in 2024. We're looking toward a good year. Now, in our last show of the year, MSNBC host Jen Psaki, who we all love, called out Donald Trump supporters who are going into the new year in the 2024 presidential election, attempting to downplay or rewrite what happened on January 6th when mobs of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol and tried to overturn the election. Now, sharing clips of lawmakers like Senator Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell earlier taking to the Senate floor to express their disgust about the day lawmakers had to flee for their lives. The former White House press secretary compared them to recent comments by House Speaker Mike Johnson and Vivek Ramaswamy, who recently called the insurrection an inside job, which I always thought was weird. An inside job. Well, who was president at the time? Donald Trump. Who was in control? The Republicans. So if it's an inside job, you're just making our point. It was you, motherfuckers. Now, according to Psaki, the thing is, we did see for ourselves. Everyone did. As we approach another anniversary of that day, none of it should be in question. A group of people motivated by the lies of then sitting President Donald Trump attacked the Capitol in a desperate attempt to keep him in power, she continued. But for the coalition that supports Donald Trump, what happened on January 6th is apparently, unfortunately, still up for debate. She added, and as we enter the new year, the specter of political violence continues to hang over the country. She's right. I don't think that we're in danger of any mass violence like we saw on January 6, 2021. We've got these people who live on fear, absolutely frightened to do anything like that again. They see it as a trap and that they'll get put in jail, and they're fucking right. It's not a trap. You have your choice to either be a criminal or not. And if you are a criminal, you will be arrested, prosecuted, and sent to motherfucking jail. Just ask the other insurrectionists that are sitting in jail now. All right, we're going to be wrapping up here pretty quick. Last thing, Lincoln Project co-founder and former Republican strategist Rick Wilson lambasted GOP presidential candidates on Sunday for being too scared to hold Donald Trump accountable if he's found guilty of felonies in which he's charged. And I was talking about that earlier. Among the questions Republican candidates are getting as to whether or not they would pardon Trump were he convicted of federal crimes by a jury. Both Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis said they would. We talked about that. Wilson explained that their candidacies are operating in kind of a moral vacuum. The slightest understanding of what would actually happen were Trump to be pardoned. That's interesting. We're not saying if he becomes president, that if even he doesn't become president, what happens if he's pardoned? Rick Wilson has some insight. The idea that Trump is above the law, that Trump cannot be held accountable, that Trump, nothing that he does could ever be held up to judicial scrutiny in this country, that is not the American system of governance. They are saying we will carve out a special exception for a guy who we know has committed criminal acts, who we know tried to overthrow the United States government, and they will pardon him. Rather than slowly disappearing into the pages of history, Wilson thinks Trump will instead use a pardon to continue to proclaim his innocence. Legally speaking, a federal pardon must force someone to admit to his or her guilt, but Trump will likely find a way to change the story, which is what he always does. Even though we might see him is guilty. We could see it on videotape. He'll tell people later that that's not true. Don't believe what you see. Listen to me. Now, people of a reasonable mind won't do that, but there's a faction of folks that will. They're too stupid to know any better. Now, the response from Trump is not going to be, "Oh, thank you for pardoning me. I'm an 80-year-old man," said Wilson. The response will be, "Now that I've been vindicated, I will seek power again." This is a guy who has to be told over and over again the rules don't apply to him. The law doesn't apply to him. They are repeating the stupidest and most pernicious assertion you can make about Trump, which is that we are going to give the guy a free pass, that his illegality, his criminality, his unbelievable corrosive behavior in this democracy is going to be forgiven if Republican somehow gets the nomination against him. It is absolutely astounding. Now, again, this is all supposition. This is all speculation. There isn't going to be a Republican who is going to be elected president. So the idea of a Republican pardoning him isn't a real issue. I mean, I know it's not said and done until the election is over, but everything we look at says that Donald Trump can't win. No Republican can win. Their party themselves are too divided to make that happen. But then you throw in all the other bullshit, the indictments, the trials, the crimes, the upcoming indictments that are no doubt going to hit the members of Congress. None of this is helpful to them in 2024. There's no real way they can win this fucking thing. It's just not possible. And they aren't going to win. Donald Trump will not get pardoned. And you're probably saying to yourself, well, what about 2028? What if a Republican gets in and they pardon him? Well, if Donald Trump has already spent some time in jail and he's going to go from being, what will he be, 78 when he runs in 2024? So he'll be 82 in 2028. He's not going to survive that long. You don't go through the shit that Donald Trump is going to go through at 78 years old and survive. You just fucking don't. There's no way he makes it. And if he does make it, by that time people have walked away from him. He has no power. Maybe amongst his cult members, but as I've said many times before, there's not enough of them. There's just not enough of them. And there's going to be less as time goes on. All right. We are going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. I thank you for taking the time to listen on this New Year's Day. If you don't listen on this New Year's Day, I fucking get it. We got other shit to do. But we're going to keep providing the podcast so you have something to listen to should you have an interest or a need. And I hope you have a great day. And of course, we will talk to you again tomorrow.